everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Sean's Movie Crusades. My name is Sean Wascrew, and I'm going to review all the latest films in theaters and streaming, as well as anything that you guys recommend, whether it be recent films or old school movies. Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe button to the channel, so that way you guys stay up to date with all the latest videos. And also don't forget to follow us on all the social media outlets you see below. Now, today's review, we're going to be going over the latest film coming out of the WWE studios. For people who don't know what that is, that's the World Wrestling Entertainment. Fighting with My Family. Now, this movie is kind of special to me in a way because, like I've said on this show before, I am a huge wrestling fan. I've been following professional wrestling pretty much since I can remember. I mean, personally, one of my first memories that I remember is literally sitting on my couch with my dad and my brother watching WrestleMania 2. And then for anyone who knows me knows that I actually was an independent professional wrestler for 14 years, between 2001 all the way to 2015. So pro wrestling is in my blood. It's something that I take very seriously. It's something that I am very passionate about. So when films come out about pro wrestling, I tend to be a little more hard on them because I don't like how they are usually portrayed in films because the people put the whole oh, it's fake persona on it, which nothing annoys me more than people who say wrestling is faked. Just because it's fixed does not mean it's fake. People who watch Game of Thrones know it's fake, but tend to have no problem pointing out that wrestling is fake. Anyway, not to go on a tangent about that, but I tend to, like I said, shy on more of the harder side when it comes to pro wrestling movies, as they are very important to me, or the sport entertainment business of professional wrestling is very important to me. And the way it's perceived in films, I tend to be a little bit more harder on it, such as films like Ready to Rumble. I thought was actually, even though it's a stupid comedy, I quite enjoyed how they portrayed pro wrestling in that movie, and I really liked the movie overall. Whereas movies like Nacho Libre, I could not stand how they portrayed pro wrestling in that film. I felt they made fun of it to a point, and I know a lot of people like that movie, but for me, because of how they portrayed pro wrestling in that film overall, it basically made me downright hate that film entirely. So depending on how a movie is portrayed that is about pro wrestling towards the pro wrestling business can really sway me one way or another. Now, me being a movie critic now, I kind of have to separate myself from that aspect. So in this review, I will kind of get two sides to that. I will keep myself towards a movie critic standpoint from a person outside of a pro wrestling mindset, and then I'll also explain things to people who are pro wrestling fans who will be going into this movie. So bear in mind that my review will kind of go in two separate ways at certain points of this. I will say it before I do it, so that way you guys are well informed. But yeah, so WWE Studios, they've been making films for they're over a decade now. They haven't been real good movies. There's been some that have been okay, but it's usually their way of kind of introducing their pro wrestlers to the movie business. I mean, that's how The Rock started. For instance, they gave Rock his first film role outside of The Mummy Returns. They helped produce The Scorpion King, which basically showcased The Rock into the star he is today. Stone Cold Steve Austin, he had The Condemned. John Cena, who's now rising up in the show business, he got his start with The Marine. And then there's been some others that have just been downright awful, such as like See No Evil. But they started to, once they actually do movies that aren't pro wrestlers centric, such as like the horror film Oculus that came out a few years ago, they tend to actually be pretty well put together films. And with this movie, Fighting with My Family, which is about the true story of the pro wrestler known as Paige, or her real name is Sarah Knight, they actually get a pretty good cast of actors in this. I mean, as you can see behind me here, The Rock is in the movie. He's got basically two scenes in the film overall. And then you also got Lena Headey from Game of Thrones or 300, and Nick Frost, who's a fantastic comedic actor. Anyone who knows any great movies knows Shaun of the Dead, or basically any of the other Edgar Wright comedies knows that Nick Frost is a hilarious actor. And then, of course, Vince Vaughn is in the movie, and we haven't really seen Vince Vaughn do a whole lot lately, so it's nice to see him kind of in the forefront of a film again. So they actually got a good core cast of actors in this film. And then Stephen Merchant is the director of this, and I know Stephen Merchant as a comedic actor. He's a pretty funny guy overall. I've never actually seen him direct anything, or if I did, I didn't know he directed it. So I was actually kind of intrigued by the group of people that were actually putting this film together, and because the unique story that it involves. Because the story of Paige, and I'm just going to call her Paige because that's how most people know her, instead of by her real name, Sahara Knight or Ciara Knight. I'll just call her Paige. The true story of Paige is a unique one on its own, and that's basically where the plot is of this film. The plot follows Paige and her actual family, who is basically a pro wrestling family. Her father, Ricky Knight, he is a former gang criminal member, and he falls in love with his wife Julia. And they basically turn their life away from crime and create a pro wrestling business, and in turn become professional wrestlers. And then as they have 3 children, Roy, Zach, and Ciara. I know I'm saying her name. That's why I'm just going to call her Paige, because I just don't know how to say the name properly. And they all grow up to become professional wrestlers too, and they run their own professional wrestling organization in Norwich, England, and it's a tight knit family of pro wrestlers, and they just put on shows and live their life as professional wrestlers. Now, they do send tryout tapes to the WWE to try and get Zach and Paige on the to get a tryout, and it does succeed. And so WWE comes to England for a show, and they have a tryout for Paige and Zach. And Zach, who is the more pro wrestling enthusiast of the two, because he's been doing it since he was 6 years old. Paige didn't start until she was 13. Basically, what happens, and this is in the trailer, so this is not. Plus, it's a true story, so all this stuff you can find. Basically, during the tryout, Paige actually gets the nod from WWE and gets brought to Florida, while Zach does not make the cut and gets left behind. And the story is basically of how Paige has to adapt to her new surroundings, being in Florida, away from her family, which she's never done before, and basically trying to carry the family name of this family of pro wrestlers to become something that they've always wanted to be, and she's the only one that has ever had the opportunity. And will she be able to capitalize on it, or will she just go back to England and just settle with what she has? And that's basically the actual story. And this spans, even though they don't really do a concept of time in the film, this does span over about 3 years, from Paige getting signed to where the end of the movie actually does go to. But the way the film runs, it makes it seem like it all happens within a year, which is very misleading. But that's the general plot of Fighting With My Family. Now, what works in the movie is the actress who plays Paige, Florence Pugh. It's P-U-G-H, so Pug with an H. Personally, I've never seen her in anything outside of this, but she does a fantastic job as Paige. And knowing the Paige character, real Sarah, I apologize. Knowing the real life Paige to the character Paige, Florence does a phenomenal job of capturing the essence of the Paige character, inside and out of wrestling. And really, because the movie does not work if Florence does not put on a fantastic performance, and she does put on probably one of the better performances of the year so far. the trials and tribulations that she has to go to, basically being a fish out of water and having to kind of learn to be on her own and do things that she's not comfortable doing and kind of out of her element of doing. Florence does a fantastic job of portraying this with her role, and carries that emotional weight that she has, because all of her family is holding all this weight on her, that she needs to succeed and that, you know, she needs to carry the family name. And Florence does a fantastic job on it, and she is literally the highlight of the film. And the real reason that you come to see this movie overall is the performance of how is she able to portray Paige overall, and she does a fantastic job. Never in this movie did I feel that she was not acting like Paige would act. I mean, based off of how the script goes, she does a great job, and she's a highlight of the film, and I can't commend her more. The rest of the family itself also do a great job. Nick Frost does a great job as Ricky Knight. Lena Headey does a great job as Julia Knight, and Jack Lowden does a great job as Zach. The dynamic between Zach and Paige in the film is another highlight of the film, as this brother-sister combination. I mean, you can tell that they're best friends. They've grown up together. They're super together, or super close in terms of friendship and wrestling in general. And watching not necessarily the downfall, but just watching the heartbreak that Zach goes through when he gets turned away from the WWE, and how it kind of puts a fork in the road of the relationship between him and Paige, is kind of heartbreaking to watch. And to kind of just watch how the film unfolds based off of that storyline element is very intriguing, to say the least. And then obviously basically when the family is together, that's where the movie's at its best, because all four actors do a great job of portraying not a normal family, but normal by their standards. And it's a highlight of the movie watching all four of these actors work within themselves, and just watching them interact with one another is great throughout. The Rock is funny, as always, because, let's face it, Dwayne Johnson is an incredible actor, and his charisma knows no bounds, and him actually coming back to play The Rock, that most people don't know because they don't follow the wrestling. They get a nice little glimpse of what The Rock really was, at least in one scene, and this scene is in the trailers. He really only has 2 or 3 scenes in the film overall, because it's not his story. And even then, the two out of the 3 scenes didn't happen in real life, so they're just kind of thrown in there so that way The Rock is on screen. But those scenes are enjoyable. And Dwayne does a great job because, let's face it, he is The Rock. So he's basically playing himself, so how could he really be that bad? Vince Vaughn. Vince Vaughn's been kind of quiet lately. I really haven't seen Vince Vaughn in a lot of things in quite a while. So it was nice to see Vince Vaughn back. He does have his funny moments, but it is more of a serious side because he is the head trainer of NXT, which is the developmental company that WWE uses when they bring in new wrestlers. And so he's kind of like the drill sergeant / coach to these young wrestlers. And he does a great job of portraying that character, playing kind of tough comedic role with a little side dramatic. So it's nice to see Vince Vaughn back doing stuff that makes people take notice that Vince Vaughn is still around and kicking. And he does a great job in the movie, and he is a delight to have on screen again in a role that actually is enjoyable to watch him in. Because the last few things he's been in just has not gone well. Not necessarily because of Vince Vaughn himself, but because the movies he was in or stories just weren't that great to begin with, and you could tell Vince Vaughn really wasn't believable. Not believable, but you could tell that Vince Vaughn really wasn't feeling the movies that he was in previously. So it's nice to see him in something that you can actually feel Vince Vaughn is getting back to his old ways. Now, what does not work in the movie, and bear in mind, this is where I told you earlier, where the two mindsets of the pro wrestling part of me and the movie critic part of me is going to splinter. First off, I will go with the movie critic mindset. First things first, the not using the real people in the story was a problem for me. Because obviously Vince Vaughn's character, he's basically a combination of 4 or 5 people in real life. that were in these roles. So, and then also some of the wrestlers that Paige meets. Now, when she goes to the actual WWE part, they use, real wrestlers in it. So you do see some cameos of, like, from Big Show, Sheamus, The Miz, John Cena. So you do see some regular faces in terms of you are a wrestling fan. But there are a lot of generic wrestlers or people that she meets in NXT that aren't portraying real life people, which was kind of a bummer for me because I was excited to see, who's going to play this particular wrestler? Because obviously, knowing when Paige was in NXT at this time frame, you knew what wrestlers were around her. So I was excited to see who was going to portray these characters. But then when you find out that they're just generic people, was kind of a bummer for me. And so not using real life people for the story, or using actors to play real life people in the story and just chalking up generic characters in general for the film was kind of a negative for me, because knowing the story, knowing the real path that Paige took, and them not using those people was kind of a bummer for me overall. Now, the movie is considered a family comedy, but I think it works best as a drama with comedic elements in it, mainly more just like snarky side comments and witty banter back and forth. When the movie actually does try to be, more of an actual comedy itself, it doesn't work nearly as well, and I think that's more or less the Stephen Merchant director side of it, because he is a comedian. So when he tries to force the comedy, and there's not like a lot of forceness in it, but when they do try to force some comedy elements in the film overall, it doesn't quite work all the way through. But when it actually works more of a sports drama story, I think that's when the movie really does its best overall. So some of the comedic elements just don't flow properly. There are some funny moments in the film. It's just when it feels forced, you can tell that it feels forced, and it just doesn't fully go through all the way. Now, one other part that I personally didn't like is that, once again, knowing the actual true story of Paige's life, at the end of the film, like most true stories, they usually have the fade to black, and then they have the text on the screen saying, this is what's going on today, blah, 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 blah. And while they do that, there are two parts of it that really, really irked me. One was they talk about Paige, but they leave out a very important part of the Paige story, which is in 2018, Paige suffered a severe neck injury and had to retire from pro wrestling, but she is still a part of the WWE as a co-commissioner, or basically an on-air personality on the show. But they mentioned they basically decided to just leave that completely out. So for people who don't know wrestling, and who are watching this and may become fans by the end of this film and want to watch wrestling, will be probably sad and disappointed knowing that Paige is no longer a wrestler in real life because she had the severe neck injury. And them leaving that out, I felt, I know they didn't want to leave it on a dire note, personally, but it is a true story, so why not let them know that? So leaving that out, I felt, was kind of a very bad choice. And then they add another part, and this part just kind of was like, why the hell did you put this on there? Was that they literally put Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has a very successful career outside of the WWE. No shit. The movie is literally produced by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He's one of the biggest movie stars in the world. No shit, he's had a successful career outside of the WWE. Was that necessarily needed to be put on screen? I mean, even where the movie is taking place in the time frame of where everything's at, he's already a movie star in this film. Like, at one point, Paige even says, "Are you coming back to wrestling?" He goes, "No, I'm filming a movie in Europe, and I'm just going to surprise the crowd tonight." So even in this part, he's already a successful movie star. So why did you put that at the end of the film? Was just dumb to me. And I mean, it literally just sat there going, well, no shit, why is this on there? So yeah. So as a movie critic, that's what I had wrong with the film. Not a whole lot, really. Those are little nitpicks. As a diehard, and for the people who are not pro wrestling fans or know pro wrestling, feel free to skip to my overall thoughts. For my pro wrestling fans, and for the people who actually follow pro wrestling, this part's for you. While the movie itself is probably, as a non-pro wrestling fan, probably so far one of the best films of the year, for a pro wrestling fan who follows wrestling on a weekly basis and who knows the story and who has the WWE Network and follows all that stuff, this movie is very inaccurate in a lot of situations. And it really pisses me off because this movie is literally produced by the WWE. They have no reason not to follow the true story of Paige. And for them to force this story as to being an underdog story pissed me off. Paige is not an underdog by any means. Paige was one of the best wrestlers, female wrestlers, in the world before she goes into the WWE. They totally ignore the fact that before she makes her debut in the WWE, on NXT, she was the first ever women's NXT champion for over 300 days and never lost the title. She had to vacate the belt because she went on the main roster. But they totally omit that from the film. The way the movie is portrayed, literally right before the night before WrestleMania, which that's the end point of the film, is when she wins the Divas Championship. Not a spoiler, it's in the trailers. Like, literally, they have her on the chopping block to get fired or get let go from NXT to make it more dramatic or to make her more of an underdog. Like, based on how the story's played out, 3 months prior to her winning the Divas Championship on Raw, Vince Vaughn's character tells her that she should quit or that we should have never assigned you because you don't have what it takes. She is your NXT Women's Champion, and at that point had been NXT Women's Champion for over 6 months. And they're portraying her in this film as someone who's just not going to quite make it in the WWE because she can't talk on the microphone, or she's not strong enough, or she can't handle herself properly. Even though she's got the wrestling ability, she doesn't have all the other things that make her what the WWE is. Now, yes, in terms of the diva persona, which that was the whole point of the Women's Revolution, is that Paige was the one that started it as women can be fantastic wrestlers and not have to be all glitz and blonde-haired, big-breasted models. So yes, in that aspect they do, but they don't. But that's not what they're reaching for. They're reaching for that she's too weak, she's too in herself, and she doesn't have what it takes to stand out. And that's not that was never Paige. Paige was unique. Paige was this driving force in NXT, and the crowd loved her. The crowd adored her, and the way they portray her in this towards the crowd is bullshit. Literally, in the final moments of the film, when it shows her debut on Raw, they completely do that scene 100% different to a point than the real life version of the film. Anyone who sees this movie can literally go on YouTube or the WWE Network and look up Paige's WWE debut and see how incorrect they filmed this thing. They make it seem like Paige can't talk in front of an audience, and they make the crowd boo Paige. The real version of the story that is on TV, so it's not like it's hidden, the crowd goes apeshit for Paige. The crowd loves Paige. They literally are chanting that this is awesome, that Paige is on TV. And they portray Paige as this person who they don't know whether or not she's going to be able to cut it in the ring with AJ Lee, who was the champion at the time. And that's not the way the WWE works. So for anyone who's an actual pro wrestling WWE fan who follows it religiously, this movie's kind of bullshit in a way, because Paige was never this weak or underdog-like. She was the best women's wrestler on the entire roster, whether it be NXT or the main roster itself. She never, I mean, maybe at this beginning, maybe she did, but once she was actually on NXT, she was the pound-for-pound best wrestler on their roster. And she was their champion for almost a year before they put her up on the main roster. And the only reason they put her on the main roster is because all the women on the main roster were garbage, and they sucked, and they needed to do like a jolt of fire under their asses. to make the women's revolution a thing. And so they brought Paige up because they know Paige could do it. Not the way they portrayed it in the film here. So as a actual pro wrestling fan who follows Pro Wrestling Weekly and knows the real story of Paige, this movie is incredibly fucking infuriatingly frustrating because it is not told correctly, and it is told from a bullshit underdog approach that is not at all what it was in real life. But now back to the movie critic side of the things. As someone who does not follow the WWE and who does not follow the weekly stories or actually the true stories behind the scenes, you guys aren't going to know that at all. So the story itself, or the movie itself, comes off really, really well. And that's where it goes into my overall thought. Movie critic brain, the movie is, excuse me, one of the better films of the year. Right now, it is probably my number one film of the year because the movie as a whole, taking the pro wrestling fan out of the equation, the movie itself is incredibly tight. The cast or the acting in the film is incredibly strong throughout for most of the way through, and the story is incredibly thoughtful and it draws you in. And for the people who don't know pro wrestling, it could make you fans. It could make you want to tune in and watch them, which it does its job very well, and it does a great job telling the story of Paige, even though it's not entirely accurate. So because of that, I would have to say I highly recommend this movie for people who are not pro wrestling fans, or for people who are maybe social fans that don't follow it as much as your regular wrestling fans or diehard fans. You guys are really going to enjoy the film overall, and for people who just want to see The Rock, you guys might be upset if you only see The Rock for 2-3 scenes, but he's great in the scenes that you're in. But I also encourage people to see this film to see the fantastic performance of Florence Pugh and basically the rest of the cast overall. And but for the pro wrestling fans, the diehard fans, you will probably still like this movie. You will probably enjoy this movie quite a bit because it's actually a good wrestling film in a sense. But for people who know the true story of Paige and how things were actually done, which once again, all this stuff is on YouTube, the WWE Network. It's not hard to find. You can literally watch the exact same scene or the real life version of the end of the film and see how inaccurate it actually is. And that part might annoy a lot of people, just like it does for me with Bohemian Rhapsody, how it wasn't historically accurate to try to make the movie more dramatic or make it more of kind of a run-of-the-mill behind the music kind of film. This still tries to take the underdog sports movie approach, but the film so far this year is probably the best or one of the best films of the year overall. So like I said, I strongly still recommend Fight With My Family, even though I do have my serious issues with it, but that's from a pro wrestling standpoint, not from a movie standpoint. And so that's where we go into a new thing that I have now added to the show. I hope you guys enjoy this overall. I've now added a top 10 list to the show where I will show you my rankings for the top 10 movies of the year. Now, this list will be ever-changing because based on a given day, I might think a movie that I've currently ranked number one isn't maybe not number one anymore, and the movie that's number 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever might move up. So this is an ever-changing list based on new movies coming out and just, longevity of how long the films have been out. This is my current top 10. Now that I've actually gotten to 11 movies watched this year, this is currently my top 10 list of 2019. And like I said, this can change from a week-to-week basis. Starting at number 1, it is Fighting With My Family. Right now, I do think pound for pound from beginning to end, it is probably the tightest film of the year so far, followed by How to Train Your Dragon. I know I'm surprised that that's not number 1, but let's face it, there were parts of that movie that I really did not enjoy. Followed by number 3 with Lego Movie 2, the second part. Followed by Happy Death Day to You. Followed by Alita Battle Angel, The Upside, Glass, Escape Room, Velvet Buzzsaw, and Cold Pursuit. And just outside of the top 10 is Netflix's Polar. And like I said, this will change from week to week. I hope you guys enjoy this new aspect of the film. For people who want to say, so where does this rank on your best of the year list? Now you guys can see it, and I will add this to the end of every review from here on out. so you guys can see where my mindset is from throughout the rest of the year. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys enjoyed the review. If you guys think this review was good, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you guys feel like the review was worth sharing, go ahead and hit that share button. But most importantly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that way you guys stay up to date with all the latest film or the latest videos that pop up on the page. And also don't forget to follow us on all the social media outlets you see below. If you got any comments you would like to share on the video, feel free to leave them below. Or as well as any films that you recommend being reviewed by me, feel free to leave them in the comments. Or any of the social media outlets you see below. And until next time, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, Movie Crusaders.